for the first time in more than 20 years, there would be no live television coverage of Newcastle Rugby League on local screens, a situation Mr Fox says is worrying on the eve of Newcastle's entry into the Sydney competition.
Well, the media keeps people in front of the public's eye, and of course we're worried about it, but one's got to be realistic about it and face it. If the game's played well enough, the public will want to see it again. So it's up to our clubs to produce the goods, and we hope we'll be able to do it.
The Lord Mayor's address at the Businessmen's Club Lunch is a traditional event for the businessmen to learn firsthand the Lord Mayor's plans and hopes for the year. It's also a chance for the Mayor to get feedback on those ideas and to learn the expectations of the business community. Today, John McNaughton's address concentrated on the Newcastle Business District and the suburban business areas. He wants to establish an action plan and management strategy for each of those areas, and he hopes the business community and the public will help. Mr McNaughton reiterated his desire for the community to dictate to the council what they want in Newcastle through workshops and public meetings.
But my vision for the city of Newcastle is a city that is moving ahead at the behest of the citizens of the city, and that means getting together with those citizens in the way that we did the CBD study and finding out what the citizens want, and seeing that we put those actions into practice. And we've demonstrated we can do it once, and having done it once, we can do it again.
Mr McNaughton also touched on the pressing issue of the state dockyard and said he will not get involved unless he is asked to.
My stance on the state dockyard is that it is being examined by specialists who know what they're about. That's from the unions and from the management and the owner, which is the state government. I don't see that there's any input that I can put into that matter at the present time that's going to make the situation any better. If there's something I can do, I'll be very pleased to do it, but at the present time I don't believe that making public statements about it is going to help the situation at all.
Well, I was born and raised in New York. Well, you know, in New York, we just grow up playing basketball every day, you know, that's like the only thing is to do. And then I went to college in Texas, where I went to a pretty good college. We had a 88-game home winning streak, one of the longest streaks in the nation. So, and also my coach, Pat Foster, he was a strong coach. He emphasized on the basic things, the fundamentals, playing the game. You know, he taught me a lot of things.
And what about since then? You've played or had experience with some of the professional outfits, I believe.
Oh yes, I have. I got drafted by a club, the Phoenix Suns, and unfortunately it didn't work out for me. I didn't quit then. I still tried out. I got picked up by another team, the Chicago Bulls, and I played in a lot of summer leagues and a lot of pro leagues in New York. And I met this guy, Jim White, who's my agent now, and he got in contact with these people, and
here you are.
Yeah.
Ready to play the season. What do you know about Australian basketball for a start?
I don't know much about it, but I heard so many great things about Australia. I just had to come down here, you know, and just see the places. It's a beautiful country, you know. I'm just so excited about being here. I'm looking forward to playing, and hopefully we can win a lot of games.
The joint venture for more affordable housing was formed 3 years ago. It's administered under the Department of Housing and Construction and involves the Department of Planning and Environment and industry groups. The venture aims to tackle the future housing needs of Australia, and as the Director of Housing for Master Builders Association, John Murray, acknowledges, those needs are changing.
We know that by 1990 more than 50% of the population will be over 35 years old, and what that will mean is that there will be a shift in the emphasis of providing housing for newlyweds to providing housing for people who live longer and have other aspirations and other needs, and the housing industry will have to respond to that.
To cater for the growing number of childless families, retirees and single parents, the venture is advocating more townhouse-style developments. To reduce costs, the group is looking first to the way land is now developed.
We have focused most of our attention on the planning, the engineering and the siting of residential development sites, because we believe in those three elements we are able to make some very significant cost improvements.
Eraring is seen as the Rolls-Royce of power stations in Australia. Complete with its fully computerised operations and warning system, the station has become a model for other states and other countries. But the generation of energy isn't the only technological boom at this plant. It's also a forerunner in pollution control. When it was built, stringent environmental restrictions were placed on Eraring in terms of air and noise emission. Most ash and dust from the boilers is prevented from escaping through the 200-metre chimneys by these fabric filter bags. The station needs 190,000 of these Draylon filters. Although they last about 4 years, they cost $6 million to replace, so Elcom is trying to find ways of prolonging their life. The ash is forced through the filters by giant fans, creating the same effect as a vacuum. While these fans are solving the air pollution problem, they are generating complaints from residents about the noise.
We became aware of a noise problem with the fans after some local residents complained that they'd heard some noises at night. This was later traced down to a problem coming out of our stack late at night when we have a thermal inversion. And as a consequence of that, we investigated the source of that noise, and it was found to be the fans.
While it's only unusual weather conditions that cause the noise to be deflected onto residential areas, Elcom is compelled to solve the problem. That's where the $8 million state-of-the-art silencers come in. 4 have already been installed onto the fans on 2 of the 4 units. When the final 2 silencer units are fitted by June this year, Eraring Power Station will have completed its environmental responsibilities in terms of both noise and air pollution.
At a mass meeting of all SDN employees this morning, resolutions were carried, endorsing the work practices review to be chaired by a Deputy President of the New South Wales Industrial Commission, accepting the government's offer of a modified voluntary retrenchment scheme, and accepting the government's undertaking to consider union submissions on restructuring the SDN and to provide information necessary for the preparation of union submissions. Acceptance of the government's proposals on these matters is conditional upon further details which the government will provide in the next few days. For example, terms of reference of the work practices review, and the other matter of course is the package on redundancy benefits that will go to the Parliament today, and on consultation with relevant unions on matters that affect.
It was about 3 o'clock this afternoon when residents in Pitnacree Road, East Maitland, awoke to an explosion. 5 units from 3 stations faced the daunting task of bringing the inferno under control, as thousands of dollars worth of timber was engulfed in flames. The twisted metal in the burnt-out remains gave a stark indication of the intensity of the blaze. Today, scientific squad detectives sifted through the ashes to find a cause for the fire, while an estimate was made of the total damage bill. Mill manager Neville Sly says the yard, which employs 12 people, has been in operation for 60 years and was undergoing improvements. He estimates the damage will be in excess of $500,000. But despite the setback, he hopes the yard will be back to limited production next week.
We have an alternate breaking down saw here that we can bring into production, and it will limit our cut to a certain degree because we won't be able to handle big logs. We'll only be able to handle logs of small dimensions, but at least we'll be able to keep the men in work and keep our builders and customers, you know, as happy as we hope to.
If there is a happy side to this tragedy, an antique steam-driven mill made in America was left untouched by the fire. It's destined for a museum in the recreated gold mining village of Sovereign Hill in Victoria.
Michael Anderson was the Principal Research Officer on the National Aboriginal Conference for its 4-year period. In that time, he examined all issues relevant to the drawing up of a treaty between the states and Aboriginal tribal groups.
We Aboriginal people realise that there's got to be one government. It has to be a united government, but of course the treaty, the compacts that we're talking about, will be able to organise a system whereby we all know exactly where we stand, right? And we know who's who, and we know who owns what. We know what so and so is getting, so that there's no more Aboriginal people being, you know, deprived. And we're not asking for handouts. We're actually getting back what we owned.
Mr. Anderson has travelled widely examining agreements between conquering governments and the people they disenfranchised. He says Australia is the only country where there is no treaty or where there was no war to defeat the original landowners. He'd like to see a similar treaty between the Australian state governments and his people as that now in place between the German nation and the Jews.
I think they'd be contributing basically the same as what happens in Germany, where, you know, the Jewish people were successful in the Nuremberg trial in saying that, you know, the atrocities of genocide against those people during the wars. Our situation here in Australia is very similar.
The Aboriginal Conference will use their research to generate discussions with politicians to have a promise for a treaty by 1988. They say they'll also field political candidates in the 1988 federal elections and believe that in many electorates they will have the power to determine which candidates are elected.
Saying the subject needs to be treated sympathetically.
It was quite a tribute today to a man who captured the imagination of Australian sports fans more than 70 years ago. Les Darcy won the Australian middleweight and heavyweight crowns before he left for America, where he tragically died at the age of just 21. Today, his name was immortalised as politicians, including Sports Minister Michael Cleary and Roads Minister Laurie Brereton, named the first stage of the Maitland Intercity bypass after the boxing great. It was a fitting tribute as Darcy grew up in the area and bought his mother a house which now overlooks a section of the bypass. It was largely the efforts of Darcy's brother Joe which resulted in today's tribute. When Darcy died in 1917, he had won 46 out of his 50 fights, including 29 knockouts. When the coffin was brought back to Australia, 100,000 people turned out to honour the boxer. Darcy's brother Jack is pleased about the latest tribute.
I'm very pleased about it myself. The family, the whole family is very pleased about it.
Great. Okay. Thank you. It's been a real thrill for you.
Was, yes. I used to go to Sydney. My father used to take me to Sydney to stadium to see Les fight too. Like, you know.
Your brother Joe has been fighting for this road to be named after Les. It must be pleasing now that it's come through to the
I'm
family.
very pleased about it myself. The family, the whole family is very pleased about it.
And of course now it's Joe's name is etched down in Maitland where it should be.
Yes, that's right.
This weekend, more than 600 volunteer workers from around the state are constructing a Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall at Marylands, a western suburb of Newcastle. The workers will build the 650 square metre worship centre in just 48 hours. They started at midday yesterday, worked through last night and will work now until midday tomorrow, when it's due to be finished in time for the first meeting at 2 p.m. As well as the hall, the workers will landscape the garden and lay grass in time for the meeting. The project is part of the Jehovah's Witnesses Australia-wide Quick Build program. With no labour costs, the hall will cost just $200,000. Newcastle got home by 90 runs in the limited over fixture at the #1 sports ground, but it wasn't a one-sided match for much of the game. It took a record 9th wicket partnership of 89 runs in 48 minutes by Newcastle's Neil Budden and Steve Christie to ensure a stronghold on the game for the locals. The pair smashed 50 runs off the last 4 overs, with Christie hitting 4 fours and a 6 off the last 5 balls. That superb performance took Newcastle to a final score of 8 for 203 off the 50 overs. The ACT took the crease but had no answers to the Newcastle attack and managed a total of only 113. That man Christie took 3 wickets for 4 runs in his first 3 overs, but the best local bowler was Dutchie Holland with 5 wickets for 19 off 9 overs. As you may have guessed, Steve Christie was named man of the match. Next door at the #2 sports ground, Umina won the Prudential Cup Hunter Valley final from Raymond Terrace. The Pulborough Island Classic is a gruelling test of powerboat and skier. 3 laps around the lake, from the Belmont 16-footers to Wanji Point and then around Pulborough. This year's Classic saw Sydney boats leading the way home from a field of 116 entrants from throughout the country. It used to be that behind the 8 ball was bad luck, but in the case of Sydney's Rod and Steve Twicken, 8 ball was the 8-litre unblown V8 that took them to victory in the Classic. Although they started well back in the field, they finished in a time of 39 minutes, 11.86 seconds. Second home was another Sydney boat, Dad, with Illawarra boat Piranha coming in third. Still in the water, but at Blacksmith Beach yesterday, more than 600 young surf lifesavers were competing in the Newcastle Branch Junior Championships. Competitors came from the 9 clubs in the Newcastle Branch to match their muscles in the surf in the 21st of these championships. More than 60 events were contested yesterday, with girls showing they can do anything the boys can do.
Ranger comes back.
3 drivers, including Paul O'Neill, went into the final round in good position to take out the championships. Local driver Graham Cowboy Lilford was on equal standing at the top with O'Neill, while Ross Nicastri was close behind. When the final field of 18 got underway, there were really a dozen drivers with a chance. O'Neill got the title by winning the race after a polished and sensible drive that saw him break through from 7th place on the grid. Lilford, on the other hand, found trouble and was unable to head down O'Neill in the run for the line. Another Lismore driver, John Leslight, came 2nd in the race and 3rd in the national championship.
Something's got to give, and it did. Dale up onto the wall, down in front of Rao, right in front of Butcher.
You
The 3 senior engineers have been working with the Snowy Mountains Engineering Corporation in Cooma for the past 6 weeks. Today, as guests of the Hunter District Water Board, they inspected the $27 million project at Burwood Beach. The engineers are particularly interested in tunnelling technology, so after gearing up, they were taken underground to inspect the tunnel boring machine in action. The outfall tunnel is about 6 months behind schedule, as the process of grinding through the layers of rock is taking longer than expected. Completion date for the outfall pipe is now March next year, though the pumping station and primary and secondary treatment works will not be finished before 1991. The Chinese engineers use tunnelling technology to construct a number of irrigation systems. One of the largest is in Gansu province in the northwest of China, where farmers are now dependent upon rainfall alone to irrigate crops.
Well, it's a very important project, and we can say this irrigation project is the largest in China, not only in Gansu, it's the largest.
From Newcastle, the engineers returned to Cooma for a final inspection before returning to China.
The full rep team to play Sydney Parramatta on Sunday is David Hill at fullback, David Grant and Mark Bates on the wing, Wood Snowden and Craig Mason, the new boy with Western Suburbs in the centres, Peter Walsh is 5'8" and captain, Steve Walters the halfback, Neil Moy first selected is now out and John Crooks comes in, David Woodbury and Greg Hayward play second row, Jim Fowler in the front rowers, Phil Williams is the hooker, the reserves are now Mike McKinnon and Steve Prest who comes into the side. Fitness test was conducted this afternoon, and I spoke to coach Robert Finch about Moy's exclusion.
Yes, Neil's out for business reasons. We've brought John Crooks up into the side. I'm sure he'll do a very good job. It is a very hard job, trying to prepare a side in 1 week to play against a side that's probably been together for 3 to 4 years.
And the best side in the world?
That's correct, yes.
What do you say to young blokes about Peter Sterling and Brett Kenny and the like?
Well, you try to play it down as much as possible. You don't really devise any tactics to try and control them, because if you do, like better sides than Newcastle have tried to and haven't succeeded. So we try to base it on what we're going to do instead of what Parramatta's going to do. I think that's our main aim.
Are you as happy as you could be about the players that you've got and now selected?
I'm happy with the players that we've got. I'm sure that they're going to give us their best, and that's all I ask. Obviously, the quality of the players in comparison to Sydney football is chalk and cheese. Probably this side there might be 1 or 2 maybe that would be in a top side on a regular basis in a Sydney side. That's probably a big if.
The residents have called for the inquiry because of what they describe as an inaccurate, incomplete and hurried environmental impact statement of the F3 freeway from Wakefield to Minwai. The group say they have studied the statement in detail and are concerned over the lack of information on the proposed western route that has the support of Lake Macquarie City Council, among many other authorities. The Seahampton residents say they now fear for the future of their houses if the western route is selected, and are angry over the council's handling of the affair.
Well, we are frankly very disappointed by the lack of answers. For instance, up to 14 houses on the western side of our village could be demolished as a result of the highway alignment when it reaches Seahampton if the western route is chosen. We already know that there's a 33-foot resumption on George Bird Drive in the western side of the village, and recently we found out quite by accident from council that they've asked for another 9 metres to be added to that. Now, our inquiries over the last 4 weeks have not produced any answers from council as to what that is for.